on flirting as joint achievement. This presentation was presented in ICCA 2018 in Loughborough, UK. The title is On Flirting as Joint Achievement, a conversation analytic and membership categorization analytic approach. Presenters are Kaderati Dwoktarini, myself, and KK Luke from Nanyang. Both are from Nanyang Technological University. This presentation reports on investigation into the phenomenon of flirting as it unfolds in the course of an interaction. Flirting, defined in the OED as behaving as though sexually attracted to someone, but playfully rather than with serious intention. It is a social activity that is highly intriguing in that it is readily discernible, at least to members of the same community, and yet not easy to pin down. In spite of its obvious interest, at least to students of human interaction, relatively research has been done on spontaneous flirting interaction. One reason for this paucity is probably due to the fact that instances of spontaneous flirting are hard to come by in everyday talk. Then, some studies who actually have access to spontaneous flirting interaction tend to gloss the participants' action without going through the details. With a notable exception of Susan Spear 2017, Mortensen 2017, and to the best of my knowledge, so far there is no detailed study on sustained spontaneous flirting interactions, which take account on both verbal and non-verbal conduct of the participants. We were fortunate in obtaining a video recording of about an hour duration between two participants where multiple and extended instances of flirting sequences were found, as will be detailed later in this presentation. The piece of data where the current study is based from is a two-party conversation containing sequences of flirting interaction, which is serendipitously collected. The participants were not in any way asked, directed, or even hinted to perform flirting interaction. They were told just to talk to each other in front of the camera. Back then, in 2012, when the data was collected, the main aim was to collect a database, to have a database on people conversing in Indonesian language. Indonesian is the national language of the Republic of Indonesia, where Bali, this tiny little dot in the map, Bali Island is one of its provinces. Balinese is the regional language of the island of Bali. Since the data was collected in Bali, there may be some elements of language that's specific to Indonesian spoken in this area, in area Bali, which may not be readily generalized to Indonesian conversational Indonesian spoken in other areas of Indonesia. The participants of the data are pseudonymized as Eva, the female, and John, the male. They are both ethnically Balinese. Eva and John are acquaintances and they have known each other for more than 10 years. Eva on the left is married with a son, but her husband works overseas. The husband returns every 6 to 10 months for a short period of time, which is like a couple of weeks, maximum 4 weeks. This information is relevant because it will be made relevant by the participants themselves in most of the flirting sequences in the data. Okay, let's continue with the findings. The first one, what is flirting according to our data? Flirting is our analysis in the data shows that flirting can be characterized as an affiliative joint activity achieved through a combination of overt displays of humor and playfulness and embedded displays of sexual interest or attraction. Displays of sexual interest or attraction are embedded in the sense that flirting relevant elements are usually incorporated in actions which are otherwise natural and unremarkable in an ongoing sequence. For example, as normal next to a prior. The point in the previous slide will be illustrated through the analysis of one of the flirting sequence, one of the shortest one, flirting sequence 1. Yeah, we term it as flirting sequence 1. Chronologically, this is the first flirting sequence in the data. The two participants, Eva and John, were already sitting in front of the camera. Their conversation was recorded while they were sitting on a hut, small hut, inside of a park. Flirting sequence 1 occurs at the point when the two individuals who are setting up the camera, we call them pseudonymized, of course, Beth and Ron, they were about to leave Eva and John alone. This sequence occurs right after a wordplay which were moderated by John and Eva. The four individuals, especially John and Eva, were still gasping from laughter from the previous sequences. In addition to that, Beth and Ron have been trying to leave the premise for about 5 minutes, but every time they move away, John and Eva have something to say to them. Hence, the impression that one may get is that John and Eva do not want Beth and Ron to leave. It makes sense then for Beth to say in line 2 and 4 that they are returning in a while. Beth is also the host of this data collection event. She's the one who invited Eva to come, Beth to come, and then in turn, Eva invited John to come as well. Beth then, line 2 and 4, fits to the prototypical Indonesian utterance that a host usually say when the host is about to leave the guest alone, usually when the host gets drinks or food for the guest. Then John responds, the initial part of line 5, he says, yes, no problem. Also fits with the prototypical response to a host leave-taking remark. John then adds, this is a modification from John. John then adds a playful twist to this response, which more or less can be translated into, it'll gonna be all right, even if it takes a long time. But John doesn't stop there. He then adds more playful twist. He says it's even pleasant like this, being a spare for someone else's wife. That happens in line 9 to 10. If you pay a very careful attention, you may be able to see a hint of smile on John's face in picture B, indicating his orientation to humor or playfulness. On one hand, John's line 9 to 10 is just a playful addition to his response to Beth's leave-taking remark. On the other hand, John's line 9 to 10 may also potentially construable as flirting relevant. Through the invocation of the MCD of married couple by the mention of istri orang or someone else's wife, John puts Eva and himself as the two parties who are involved in a joint activity which is doing some kind of married couple category-bound activities. A married couple may sit together at the park, talking about the recent general election, quarreling, talking about their sexual activities or other intimate topics, though the possibilities are endless. Intimate or even sexual-related activities are the ones being possibly indexed here. And not only that, by saying enak lagi begini, or it's even pleasant, John indicates his preference of the current potentially sexual engagement or other kind of engagement with Eva. So his turn, line 9 to 10, may also index his sexual attraction to Eva. Then, this is coming from the language Indonesian, nyerep or being a spare is not a productive word in the language. It has limited collocations, either occurs as a modifier to ban or tire, or kunci or key. There are two household objects usually kept aside and only used in the absence of the original one. The specific word choice brings about playfulness, at the same time hinting on John's role or proposed role in Eva's marriage, at least within this short interaction, which is his role as a spare husband, spare to someone else's wife, similar to a spare tire or spare key. The response from Eva in line 12, we can see here, is produced with a hint of perturbation. although with a along with a hint of smile. The smile and perturbation in all likelihood indicate interpolated laughed particle. The interesting thing is, Eva picks up a specific word from John's prior turn, produces it in a certain way, thus turning that word into some kind of a keyword. He said, "Nyerap." Yeah. So the question is that, like, why he repeat that specific word from John's turn? So flirting can be characterized as an affiliative joint activity achieved through a combination of overt displays of humor and playfulness and embedded displays of sexual interest or attraction. It is affiliative joint activity. John produces a turn, Eva picks up a specific word from John's turn, which put forward the flirting relevance of John's turn. Then it is done through overt displays of humor and playfulness. As we can see, John employs word that invokes playfulness, nyerap or spare, and then both of the participants observably smile or potentially laugh as well. We can also see how potential display of sexual interest or attraction through the mention of spare and someone else's wife are being embedded into a natural and remarkable action, such as leave-taking response in flirting. Response in flirting sequence 1, as we can see just now. Okay, in the previous slide, we have gone through one of the flirting sequence in the data, flirting sequence 1, to elaborate our finding on what flirting is. And now we continue with how flirting is done in the flirting sequences in our data. First of all, flirting relevant elements may be attended to and developed into flirting sequences in one of two main ways. The first one, in which one of the participants issues what we for now call bid to enter a flirting or the production of action, potentially construable as flirting relevant. For example, it's John's incitation in line 9 to 10 in the flirting sequence 1 that we just discussed just now. There are different shades of explicitness of the bid or flirting invitation. In the data, John's line 9 to 10 stands somewhere in the middle of this explicit to subtle continuum of flirting sequence invitation. The one located at the end of the explicit continuum is, for example, the one taken from our data is that line 24 taken from flirting sequence 8. We call it flirting sequence 8. John asks Eva whether she wants to kawin him. The word kawin is polysemous. It means get married and have sexual intercourse. Whether kawin means getting married or having sexual intercourse, both can be understood as flirting relevance, since either way the sexual conveyance is rather overt. At the far end of the subtle side, at the far end of the continuum or on the subtle side, there is line 41 taken for flirting sequence from flirting sequence 3. Here John merely comments that it is scary at night. The sexual or romantic interest conveyance can manifest only after Eva picks a specific flirting relevant element of John's turn and then use it as a platform to launch her subsequent flirtatious turn. Now let's return with the mechanism of constructing flirting sequence. After one of the participants issue what may be called the bid to enter flirting or flirting invitation in the following turn, the interlocutor may respond in a variety of ways, such as we may call appreciation signal in the form of smile, laugh particle, or laughter, to disattain or decline it in the form of reminder or reprimand. When the latter options, disattention and declination, occur, this may lead to termination of the flirting. or when it occurs after the very first bit, then a flirting sequence can be said to be failed to be realized. In the other method, turn by turn, the participants produces third creative additions, subsequent turns which pick flirting element from the previous turn and then retrospectively turn it into a flirting relevant component. When this happens, we may speak of sexual or romantic innuendo creeping into an interaction. It then leads to the co-construction of extended flirting sequence. When to end a flirting sequence. Our data also suggests that the extended flirtatious sequence, where flirtatiousness slowly grows or creeps in the interaction, revolves around imaginary sexual or romantic togetherness. This is similar to what is proposed by Mortensen, 2017. What we can add from the current data to what have been identified before is that there seems to be a fine line separating imagining future togetherness and planning for future romantic togetherness. And the participants appear to be orienting to that line. Whenever that line has been crossed, one of the participants will produce a disaffiliative response, which leads to termination of flirting sequence. For instance, as what happens in flirting sequence number 6, John proposes Eva to go for holiday first with her husband. Eva then rejects John's suggestion while providing some kind of reasoning why she doesn't want to go for holiday with her husband. Then this happened, line 10 to 14 that we see on our screen. Eva coquettishly adopts John's suggestion that she wants to go for a holiday alone. Okay, pay attention on first, Eva's facial expression and head movement in line 11, picture C. And in line, okay, facial and head movement, sorry. In line 11, picture C, she performs what has been labeled as neck presentation, one of a female courtship behavior by Moore, 1985. Her coquettish behavior may be construed as flirting relevant. John then needs to notice it, picks it up, and produce his contribution on the trajectory of flirting. What he does next then, hinting on going for a holiday to Bangkok together. This is apparently where the line is crossed. Soon after, in line 17 and then 20 and 21, Eva steers the talk away from Bangkok holiday plan. After line 20, Eva and John talks about their experience flying on different airlines. So the possible C topic of going to Bangkok to actually going to Bangkok together is abandoned. And then the same thing happened on other flirting sequences in the data. The next observation, flirting and gender asymmetry. Attending to membership categorization analysis allows us to appreciate the many ways in which gender is used as a category device in the data. A close analysis of the use of gender as a categorization device in the data reveals an interesting asymmetry between two participants in their perception and treatment of each other, as well as the gender infrastructure in the culture, namely norm, which enables flirting interaction to take place as well as the asymmetrical treatment. First of all, John refers to Eva using gendered categories. Those categories are such as istri or wife in flirtatious sequence 1 and 3, jablai or flirtatious female, or a category exclusive for female in flirtatious sequence 3, and yang begini or something like this in the sequential context where Eva wears short skirt. Eva's short skirt is relevant there, or flirtatious sequence 8. In addition, John also invokes Eva's married status in segment 1, 3, 5, 6, and 7, and mother status in flirtatious sequence 5 and 9. While Eva never do the same to John, she hardly or she never do the same to John. His status and his position as a male, what kind of male, etc., was not relevant in the talk. The only point where his position is relevant is that he's jocularly using the being a spare husband in one of the example that we showed just now before in flirtatious sequence 1. Over and over, Eva's involvement in the jointly achieved flirting sequence is put on the backdrop of bad female and its derivations of wife and mother. It can be observed that the underlying assumption is that a good female or good wife should not be playing active role in constructing flirting activity. The orientation to bad female category is shown not only through the male's action but also the female's. At times, the orientations are jointly achieved by both parties. Interesting enough. Meanwhile, orientation to bad male as a result of the male's involvement in the flirting sequence, though it is often the case that the male who initiates the flirting interaction is absent. This study is able to serendipitously get hold of the rare data of naturally occurring spontaneous flirting interaction. It has offered a detailed explication on how people actually do flirting in face-to-face, naturally occurring interaction. The data suggests that flirting can be characterized as an affiliative joint activity achieved through a combination of overt displays of humor and playfulness and embedded displays of sexual interest or attraction. The data also reveals that there are two ways to attend and develop flirting relevant elements into flirting sequence. The first one is invitation acceptance method, and the second one is stepwise or creeping in. The data also shows the role of gender categorization in the construction of flirting sequence. A detailed membership categorization analysis of the data shows an interesting yet unfortunate asymmetry between the two participants on gender-related treatment to one another. So at the end of the presentation, thank you very much. Questions and comments are welcome. This presentation is based on my PhD thesis. There are actually considerably amount of details being left out in this presentation in the interest of time. Questions and comments may be given in this session or through my email address on the screen, or you can just put comment on the comment below. Thank you very much.